Welcome back. And of course, a Nile Cruise trip is a very enjoyable experience that any visitor from abroad has to actually take. And historically, the Nile Cruise was the only way to visit the temples and the tombs. And it was also a very popular means of visiting Upper Egypt and has lots of advantages to other means of travel. And with us, we have joining us today Dr. Engineer Yusuf Mazhar, who is the board member, Cairo Yacht Club.
Yes.
Well, welcome to the show, sir. It's
Thank
a pleasure
you.
to have you. At the beginning, I'd like to ask you, what does this beautiful and great river symbolize to you?
Well, from the introduction, really, this gives me a lead to what we can talk about symbolization. Now, the Nile over years has changed very much in the way it has reflected itself on Egyptian society. Let me just go back a little bit. First recollections of the Nile in its pomp and grandeur was some of the very important festivals that went on the banks of the Nile. We know that the festival Luxor, where they moved ships along the Nile from one part of one temple to the other, the Karnak to the Luxor temple, and this was something with great pomp and great beauty. So at that time, the symbolization of the Nile to the people was it was the vehicle that carried the gods of that period from one part to another. It was, and the banks were lined with people, and they waited for the whole procession to move through. This is at one time. After that, a bit later on in Islamic times, we became aware of the Nile with nilometers. So we have the period where a number of nilometers were made. Actually, in ancient Egyptian times, there are also nilometers. But in Islamic times, you know the nilometer in Rhoda,
Okay.
which is a beautiful
I was just going
building.
to ask you, what's the Nilometer?
It is a building
Okay.
where you measure the elevation of the Nile
Right.
for the Nile floods. Now this is very important from any period because it shows how far the Nile is going to go up. Is it going to go up and give enough water? Is it going to go up and flood
Of course.
and cause damages? Or what exactly is the situation? And let me tell you a very funny anecdote that in Islamic times and in ancient Egyptian times, the level of the water dictated it how much the people would pay taxes. So if
that's
there's no
interesting.
water, they would not ask for the taxes.
Okay, that's
But
very
if the
interesting.
water was plentiful, they would
They'll be
ask for
paying
full
lots
tax.
of
If it
taxes.
flooded, then again
And
nobody's
it-
going to ask for taxes. So you can see the really deep meanings
And
of
importance of
very
it,
important
definitely.
Connection with the people and their day-to-day activities, and like you mentioned, even their income is affected.
Yes,
by
affected
the
even the income. Yes.
Actually, coming to the other question was, how are the lives of the Egyptians influenced by the River Nile in that
Well,
sense?
of course, let me say that even the River Nile in ancient Egypt was the first signal that the Nile was going to flood was a star that appeared in the east, Sirius. And when this star came up on the horizon, in ancient Egyptian and Islamic times, they knew that this was the time that the Nile was going to flood. So the Nile would be dictated by a certain time. Everybody prepared for it because they would be worried they have to move to higher banks. There was no high dam at that time. So the whole culture, the growing of any products on the Nile, all this was part of the whole cycle which the Nile dictated. It was not so much a cycle as in European countries where it was winter and summer and spring, because the seasons here are not so exact, but it was flood, before flood, after flood, the harvest. That was the way it was dictated. So the Nile was really in completely control of the whole of the country,
The
even
lives.
until very recent times.
Yes, and how are you feeling today, sir, about the transformation of how we are leveraging the Nile today? Maybe we can start with the Yacht Club, for example.
Well, you see, let us say that everything on the Nile revolves on the Nile itself. So we know even that historically, people who lived far away from the Nile moved to the Nile because they could not exist in the deserts, the barren deserts. When Egypt dried up, they all moved to the Nile. So what is there on the Nile now? First of all, the Nile is a source of water. And many of, or most of the water coming to all our pumping stations comes from the Nile. So where we're recording now, only 100 meters away, there's one of the biggest pumping stations that brings the whole water of Giza. If you go up a bit further towards the north, you'll find a big station that gives the water to the other side of Cairo. Of course, before that, there was Fum el-Khalik, which was a very big entry of the Nile, and this gave the water. And we know the aqueduct, which is in Old Cairo, all these arches, where they raised the water to the top, and this went up. So water, as an item by itself, was very dependent on the Nile. The second main thing is transportation, because you could transport on the Nile, and in any era you like, the Nile was a means of transportation. And it is the cheapest and the easiest mode of transportation. Now, of course, with modern times, people, and when they built lots of bridges and you couldn't pass through with your big boats underneath, then came the other means of transportation. So transportation was very, very important. Let me say another thing, that the Nile was, unfortunately, a means of getting away all the refuse of Cairo and the other cities. So when it flooded, then it cleaned everything out into the Mediterranean. Now when it stopped flooding, you got lots of new problems. That how does the Nile clean itself? So these are the things. How does the mud starts not coming, as you know, that the
very
Nile,
important for the
yes,
for the
was
soil
very
in general,
important.
the
The mud of
agriculture.
the Nile was important for agriculture, very rich, better than manure, better than everything. And also it was the building materials of Egypt for a long time. The mud bricks.
The mud bricks.
The mud bricks.
Yeah.
So the silt of the Nile was very important. When the silt stopped coming down, we embarked in all sorts of new problems. We had to make bricks of other things. They made sand bricks. They made red bricks. They made all sorts of things. So you see how many things are
Of
dependent
course,
on the Nile.
lots of usage for the
Yes.
Nile. Let me take you, sir, back again to the tourism of the Nile.
Yes.
I know we were just speaking, you were telling me on Friday you have a yacht, something
Yes.
happening, all the
Yes,
yachts are coming out
yes.
on the Nile. And regarding the yacht tourism in Egypt, if
Well,
you can tell us a little bit about it.
Let us say the following, and I'll take it not from our own history, but from how Europe looked at us. I mean, where do the tourists come from? They come from Europe, east or west, or they come from abroad, they come from Arab countries. So tourism was very important for Egypt. Now, how did it start? It started with, let's leave ancient Egypt because we've talked enough about it.
Yeah, let's talk about today.
Yes, let's come just before today.
Sure.
The first real tourism on the Nile was the dahabeya. The dahabeya is a very long, beautiful boat which had cabins. It had a cook on board. It had a captain on board, and all the rich families, probably your great-grandfather, without you knowing, I don't know if mine went on such a thing or not, but they would take the dahabeya up the Nile and spend 3 months up. Also the foreigners, all the people who looked for the temples of ancient Egypt, they preferred to go with the Nile. So the universities had their big dahabeyas. So going up the Nile, that was the first movement, and then the trips, because there were no bridges. The most well-known trips in the world was going up the Nile. And you know that many of the artists put that. As this developed, let's say between the 2 world wars, we had the steamers.
Okay.
And the steamers went from here all the way to Luxor, Aswan, and nobody would take this short trip which exists now, Luxor to Aswan. It was all Cairo, all the way to Luxor, all the way to Aswan. It was worthwhile. It was, people had time.
How long would it take?
At that time, it took 10 to 12 days for a steamer, not the dahabeya.
Not the
The
dahabeya.
dahabeya was a very luxurious thing, and you'd enjoy it, and it was nice and sunny there. But with the steamers, which were the first elements of tourism, now, as the bridges were built, and as people had no time, they started making these hundreds of Nile steamers or line ships which exist now. And where do they go? They go from Luxor to Aswan.
So what we have now are called, they're steamers.
Yeah, they are steamers. Let's
Okay.
say they're motorized.
Motorized.
They are 3 decks high. These are the ones you